part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for stopping by to the latest edition of the Sabol Brothers on the Baseline podcast, all part of the Press Play Podcast Network. We are your hosts, John Sabol.
And I'm Scott Sabol.
Thank you for tuning in and thank you for subscribing. We have a very, very special guest. We are honored here. So let's get right to it. He is a sports legend in the entire state of Ohio, 5-time national champion head coach, 4 with Youngstown State and 1 AA. 1 with Ohio State, the BCS championship in 2002. He's also coached 6 Big Ten championship teams with the Buckeyes, including an impressive 9-1 record against that team up north, which we will get to. And he's currently the president of Youngstown State University and will be retiring on February 1st after 8 years with YSU. So if you haven't figured out our guest by that impressive intro and resume, it's the College Football Hall of Famer, YSU, former YSU that is, and former Ohio State head coach and Cleveland native, Jim Tressel. Jim, thank you for taking time and stopping by here.
Oh, my pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Jim or Mr. Tressel or Mr. President or Coach, I don't know what introduction or how I should, intro you as. What do you like being called?
Well, I just like being called, so it doesn't matter. I've been called lots of things, but I answer to them all.
All right. Well, I'm going to, because I remember you the most as coach, so I'm going to call you Coach Tressel, if that's okay with
fine.
you.
Sure.
Congratulations on a soon-to-be retirement at Youngstown State. February 1st. Why retire now, Coach, after 8 years as university president?
I've spent 48 years in higher education, 2 different venues, 38 years on the coaching side of things, and I was an athletic director for about 7 or 8 years out of that group, and spent 2 years as a vice president at the University of Akron, and it's actually been 8.75 years here from the time I started to February 1st, and I just thought it was a good time. We've really enjoyed the different challenge, and people ask me all the time, what's harder, being the head coach at Ohio State or being a president? And it's much harder to be a president. It's so much broader. There's just so many more constituencies, and you need to learn so much more. But I've enjoyed every minute of it. I'm glad I've had that opportunity. Youngstown State University is so important for the region. Education is the key, to anything. We need to do a better job in America and a better job in Ohio in education if we're going to stay as that dominant world figure and power and all the rest. But being a head coach and the president, those are 7-day-a-week jobs. And so doing that for 48 years, there are some things you don't get to do. You don't get to spend as much time with your family. I have so many former players and former coaches that, I wish I had more time for. And, so I thought, this might be a good time. I wanted to do it in February because I wanted to get the second semester started and going, before exiting and so forth. I'll still be at their graduation and everything for them in May. But so who knows what the next chapter is? When you announce you're stepping aside, then you get all these phone calls. Well, now that you're got plenty of time, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? And so we're going to let it unfold a little bit, but I'll still be very engaged in education, be very engaged with my former players and coaches, and especially the ones that are coaching. And we'll see how it flies.
Yeah, you kind of touched on that a little bit about your plans, coming up here after you retire. Do you plan on staying in the region, in northeastern Ohio?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'm a northeastern Ohio guy, and someone was asking me how long I was at each place, and the 2 stops at YSU, I think, adds up to just under 24 years. 2 stops at Ohio State is 13 years. And so 6 years at the University of Akron, 2 different stops. And I told him I'm going to stop short of going to Miami for a second time and Syracuse for a second time and live here in Ohio and Northeast Ohio. And I'm looking forward to it.
You had tremendous success at YSU as a head coach for 15 years. You won 4 national titles there before going to Ohio State in 2001. Coach, did you ever think you would return to Youngstown State as the school's president?
No, I never gave that a bit of thought. One thing you guys will find out as life goes on, just when you think you have your plan in place, something new comes up. And, a lot of times, and I talk to young people all the time, is a lot of times it happens on the heels of adversity. I know our teams, sometimes the greatest upward trajectory we took was after a tough loss, because, it's time to figure out, hey, where can I do better? How can I improve? What do we have to do to make that next step? And so I never dreamed of being a college president. I'm sure no college ever dreamed of me being their president. But timing is everything in life. And it just so happened that while I was a vice president at the University of Akron, Youngstown State was going through a little bit of a presidential transition. I became the 4th president in 5 years. And I think rather than some highly experienced president or highly experienced academic, what they needed 8.75 years ago was just a little confidence that someone cared about the place, someone loved being a part of Youngstown State University, maybe someone they recognize. And so the timing fell right, and the opening happened, at the right time. And we had really a lot of fun this last few years.
So, Jim, let's go back a little bit to your early days. You were born in Mentor. You grew up there, went to Berea High School. This might seem like maybe a dumb question, but were you a Browns fan growing up? I mean, you grew up in the heyday when the Browns were big, but
no question. I was born in Mentor, but we actually left there when I was 3. Mm-hmm. So I don't remember much about Mentor other than you look at the statistics, and my dad had 34 straight wins going before he left Mentor as the head football coach to take on the Massillon job. And then we were only there 2 years. He had 2 good years at Massillon, and he became the head coach at Baldwin Wallace. So really from age 5 through 22, I was in Berea. I went to Baldwin Wallace, went to Berea High School, and was absolutely a Browns fan. One of my best buddies in high school was Jeff Groza, the son of legendary Lou the Toe. And so, we got to hang around Mr. Groza and Vince Costello and, people like that, were legendary. And then when I went to college, my freshman year, it turned out that the Browns moved to Baldwin Wallace. And so I remember sharing our freshman locker room while they were building their facility. They didn't have any locker rooms. So they put the Browns into the freshman locker room during the fall. And I was a freshman. And my locker was right next to Gene Hickerson. And, we'd see Leroy Kelly. And I mean, they practiced a little earlier than we did. We would practice at like 3:00 after classes. They practiced around noon. So a lot of times we got to come in to the locker room to get dressed just as they were leaving the locker room. And so absolutely the Cleveland Browns were, a huge part of our passion. My father actually was recruited to go to Ohio State by Paul Brown.
No kidding.
He actually was very close with Paul. My father didn't end up staying there. He went one spring. My father was player of the year in the state of Ohio in 1942. Wow. And Paul Brown recruited him. He graduated early. December of 42, he graduated and went to spring practice and scored a couple touchdowns and threw a touchdown to Les Horvath. And then, like many of the greatest generation, he enlisted to go to war and didn't have a chance to come back to Ohio State. But he and Paul Brown remained close. So the Cleveland Browns were always a big part of our household. Ohio State was a big part of it because my dad and mom's love for Ohio State, and then the Cleveland Browns. That was our 2 teams.
So, a lot of us growing up, either we played for our dads were coaching. And I know with me, my son is now going to graduate from high school and I got a chance to coach him in football and basketball and baseball. But for you played for your dad in college. That's a whole different dynamic. Talk about that. Was that difficult? Did you guys get along? How was all that?
Well, he made it very clear when my oldest brother decided to play for him, and then when I decided to play for him, that if it was close, the benefit of the doubt was going to go to the other guy, and we had to know that, and that the reality of being the coach's son, could not end up being a negative in terms of how we fit in the team and how the team looked at him. So he made it pretty clear that it wasn't going to be easy. And I respected that about him. In fact, when my oldest brother went into coaching, he was a defensive coach at Wayne State University, and my dad had an opening on his staff on the defensive side. And my brother called him up, and here was my dad at a Division III school, and my brother's at a Division II school. And my brother's thinking, man, Dad will jump all over this. And my dad said, no, you're not a candidate. That's not what we do. It's and so he was very transparent as to how things would be. And I tell families all the time when they ask about, is it healthy to play for your dad? I said, if you're winning, it is. If you're not winning, it is not a healthy deal. And unfortunately, we won most of the time. And so it was an experience I would never trade for the world. My dad passed at age 56, so I had no idea I would have him such a short time in my life. And the fact that I got those 4 extra years, I wouldn't trade those for the world.
Wow. Yeah. You especially look back on those moments, and pretty special moments, those 4 years with your father. And I'm sure on those days, if you were to lose, I would imagine dinner would be interesting at the dinner table with your mom too.
Well, what's interesting is one of the deals, he said, if you're going to go to Baldwin Wallace, you're living in the dorm. You're not living with us anymore. So I didn't have any dinners with him.
So you ended up getting your master's degree in education at BW, right? At Baldwin Wallace?
No, at the University of Akron.
Or your University of Akron. So how did you go about having a mind of an education to then coaching football? Was that a lot of your father in you of trying to want to pursue coaching? And was the educational aspect of your degree complementary to your coaching? What made you split, or were you always want to be a coach, or was it going to be a teacher route?
It's interesting. I didn't think about anything of what I wanted to be when I was in high school, because I was like any other kid. I was playing football, basketball, baseball. I just liked playing. And I remember my guidance counselor asking me, Mr. Schuff, he said, hey, okay, now you're going into your senior year. You got to think about what you want to do and where you're going to go to college. And I'm like, all I'm worried about doing is playing my senior year. I'm not thinking that far.
Sure.
And he said, well, you need to start thinking about it. And so that's when I started thinking and maybe paying a little closer attention. My 2 older brothers decided to go to Baldwin Wallace. They both were in education. And I saw that my father was in education, and I saw the impact he was making and the fun he was having. He loved it. There wasn't a day where he said, oh, I got to go to work. He was at work most of the time and loving it. So I kind of made a decision that I was going to go and get a degree in education. I was going to teach high school, coach high school, and live happily ever after. And when I was getting ready to leave college, I got a lot of advice from people. They said, you ought to go get your master's when you're young, because if you get older and you got a family and it's a pain in the neck, and, you really ought to get a master's degree. And so I went to be a graduate assistant at the University of Akron with every intention of getting that master's and then going to a high school. In fact, while I was there, I interviewed for a couple of high school head coaching jobs and assistant coaching jobs. And then about halfway through that year that I was a graduate assistant, we had an opening on the staff at the University of Akron. And Coach Dennison, who still one of the greatest guys I've ever been around, gave me the opportunity to be a full-time college coach. And I wasn't getting any traction. No one wanted to hire me at a high school. So I thought, well, I better take the job that's being offered. And, 38 years later, I'm still in college.
We'll have more with Jim Tressel right after this.
The R&R podcast going to be rocking and rolling with you because football season is underway. College, Ohio State, the Power Fives, the MAC, the Browns. Michael Regai, are you ready to rock and roll with some football?
Kenny, I've been ready. This is our time of year. This is what R&R is all about. We're going to be with you every week. Kenny just said it, Browns, NFL, Ohio State centric. So you got to stay with us all fall and winter long here on R&R.
That's right. The Regai and Rhoda podcast coming to you here on the Press Play Podcast Network. Subscribe now and don't miss a show.
What's up, everyone? Chase Smith here, host of the Chase Smith Podcast, and my podcast reflects who I am. My hobbies, my interests, my passions, my curiosities, my careers, my questions, and my family. I'll spend time talking about all types of sports, movies, TV shows, trending news stories, and other cultural events, and even faith. This is who I am, and I hope I can get to know you as well. Join me on the Chase Smith Podcast, and let's have some thought-provoking conversations, only on the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hey everybody, it's Sam Amico from Cavs on the Break NBA podcast. Be sure to give us a listen for all your Cleveland Cavaliers recaps, analysis, breakdowns, draft talk, free agency. The list goes on and on. Give us a listen, Cavs on the Break NBA podcast.
And it's interesting when you look back, Coach, of where coaches go when you're talking college football, where they start and where they eventually get to. GA, assistant coach, coordinator, head coach, small school, big school. You know, the rise is always interesting to me when you look back at some of the resumes. And yours is very fascinating to me because you were a GA at Akron and then Miami and Syracuse and Ohio State and eventually Youngstown State for a long time. And then, of course, to Ohio State, where everything for me as a young kid, when you took that job, you were amazing to that program after the John Cooper era. And then to me, I think that really started the Ohio State movement that fans really got you going is what you said at that halftime of that Ohio State-Michigan game, the basketball game in January of 2001. And I want to play it for you because I know you've heard it many times, but I want to play it because I have a follow-up question about it, if you don't mind, because it is it's a moment that a lot of people turn to, especially Michigan fans. So it's only 18 seconds. So let's go back in the Wayback Machine, Coach, and go back to that time real quick here.
Okay. Proud of our young people in the classroom, in the community, and most especially in 310 days in Ann Arbor, Michigan, on the football field.
What do you remember about that moment? And I got to ask, was that something planned or was that something that came up organically?
Well, it certainly wasn't planned. After our press conference and so forth, we were running around doing various things. I remember making recruiting calls and so forth. And then there was, I don't know if it was the same night I was hired or I don't know. But anyway, we end up at the basketball game and they said, hey, look, at halftime, we're going to go out and you're going to wave to the crowd and, you know, we'll go from there. And I said, okay, you know, I could do that. And so we walk out on the court and I wave or whatever, and they hand me the microphone. I said, what? You know, that wasn't part of the deal, you know, but then, you know, I thought to myself, I knew that one of the focus points in my interview process was I wanted to make sure they knew that I knew what was important to them and to the Buckeye Nation and to the kids playing, most especially. I mean, the kids playing there wanted to flip that rivalry. And so I thought, well, while I've got their ear, I'll make sure they know that I know. I'm certain that I didn't have the intention of painting myself in the corner with a promise, but everyone certainly spun it that way. But you know, fortunately, you know, we kept the promise.
Yeah, fans say you kind of broke Michigan from that point on. You know, OSU went 17-2 through, I think, 2021. looking back, I mean, like you said, people kind of paint that narrative. It's kind of hard not to agree with that, at least partially, wouldn't you think?
Well, I think, we always talk to our guys about one thing about leaders is leaders take risks, and they make it crystal clear what they're trying to achieve and where they're trying to go. And you have to be willing to take a risk or you're never going to get started. And so, perhaps, that was a good feeling to our players, most importantly, is that, what? The head coach has just taken us out on Front Street and told everybody we're going to win. So we better back it up. And then I think when we won that game, because that was so unusual, Craig was the backup quarterback and they were really good. It was up there, it's hard to win up there. I think that gave us a little shot of confidence. But 2 years later, they beat us. Their teams from 01 through 07 were really good. I have to be honest, my last 3 times against them, they weren't great. They weren't, they've now, I think, finally gotten back to where they used to be, but they spent, some years not being Michigan. I hate to say it that way, but, and I think it's in part because of what our guys were able to accomplish there and really 04, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in a row. When you get that many in a row, I think we had a chance to really enhance recruiting, enhance the confidence, just like they had done to us back, decades before.
Right.
But it's now, I think the Buckeyes right now are better than the Wolverines, but the Wolverines are much better than they were 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Well, you went 9-1 against the Wolverines, Coach. You had a lot of success, clearly. Urban Meyer had the same success, went undefeated in less years after you. But why did you specifically have success against them? I mean, is it the recruiting? Is it the mentality? Is it catching them on a downward position in their program? Is it a mixture of all that? Can you pinpoint one thing?
I often think about I think history is an important subject. The study of complex design as to how things occurred is really important going forward. And everyone says, "Oh, we don't need to study history. We're a high-tech area and so forth." But so as I look back at the history of the rivalry, which, again, let's make the preface that the rivalry is what's important. So if you look back at the history, the first 25 years of the history, I don't know if we won a game or two. And then as it was going forward, I think there were a couple key things that have given us a chance to get it back toward closer to 500. I tell people all the time, I want to live long enough that we're 0.501.
Right. I know. Yep.
The rivalry. But I look at the hiring of Paul Brown as being a huge first step in history, because at that time in the 40s, 30s, 40s, the top players from Ohio, they went to Notre Dame, they went to Michigan, they went to Iowa. They didn't necessarily pick Ohio State. And I think Paul Brown really, because he was an Ohio high school coach, I think he really got us back into the recruiting race. I think the second thing, as I look at history, if you think of after Paul Brown, it was pretty nip and tuck. Woody's, time there, he was 16 and 11 or something like that. And Earl was 5 and 4. And, so we were back to, nip and it was a pretty even rivalry. But when you start from so far behind in history, it's hard to catch up when it's pretty even. And so I think the next thing that really was an important step was beginning in 2002, it really was very hard for Michigan to get the good players from Ohio. And if you looked at the history, and again, you always study how people got good. If you looked at the 90s, when Michigan had the upper hand, a bunch of those players were from Ohio.
Yep.
And if you look at the 70s and the 80s, when Bo was there, Bo was an Ohio guy, so he recruited his whole staff was from Ohio. So if Ohio State was ever going to really get back and get the upper hand in the rivalry, they were going to have to close the doors on the recruiting in the state of Ohio. Right there in the middle of all that, I think the historical thing that's underappreciated is in the mid 90s when Andy Geiger came to town and said, you know what, this place doesn't look like what could be the best place in the world. Ohio Stadium was old and tired and they'd not done anything. And they went out and spent $200 and some million. The Woody Hayes Center was not, up to par. He came in and, put the Jesse Owens track in there and the Bill Davis baseball field. And he said, we got to start looking like the best place in the country. And so I think that's a little bit underappreciated. And so between Paul Brown, then facilities, and then shut the door in recruiting, now we got a chance to maybe win at a higher rate. You might not win every time, but win at a higher rate. We're going to catch up someday. And, so I forget how far behind we are in the race now. We're about maybe 8 games under 500 or 9 games under 500, which I think when we got to Ohio State, we were 20 some under 500. So, to me, those were some key things historically.
The Andy Geiger point, Coach, is so understated, and I had never even thought about that. But you're right.
Oh,
the stadium renovations, other facility upgrades, the Woody Hayes Center. I mean, everything that had transpired after 2000 with that, really changed the game in the recruiting field. And currently, right now, by the way, Michigan leads the all-time series 60, 51, and 6. So
9 games behind.
Nine games in the last 2 years have been quite the surprise. But do you like what Ryan Day's doing with that rivalry by any chance? I just had a quick follow-up to that.
Well, I'm a Ryan Day fan. I think he's a good man. He's an outstanding recruiter. He's had good teams. Now we didn't win those 2 games. No one's going to sugarcoat that. I think that he's the kind of guy that's going to grow. He was 40 years old when he got that job? And first time head coach. I'd had my head bashed in for 15 years as the Youngstown State coach, and so Ryan will be just fine. He's a good man. He'll continue to recruit well. He'll continue to grow in the understanding. And one thing I've always believed is that to really become extraordinary, you have to suffer. And even though you hate that, you have to suffer. And I think about our 0-2 team. Everyone says, man, probably the best team we've ever played against in the history of our school is the Miami team from 0-2. That football team was, they were just crazy good. But our guys had suffered enough. They were 6-6 in 99. They were 8-4 in 2000. They lost their coach. They had to learn what the new coach was doing. We were 7-5. And that's not, 6-6, 8-4, 7-5. Whew. That's suffering. And they grew through that suffering. My prediction is that we're absolutely suffering because of those last 2 ball games. That's going to, I think, produce the impetus for us to clearly understand what this rivalry is all about. And again, they're back to talent-wise being what they were in the early 2000s, and so it's on, and so I have every bit of confidence in Ryan Day.
So let's go back. You talked about the 2002 season, the BCS national title game against Miami. All right, I remember watching that on TV. My brother does. At what point in that season did you go, all right, you know what, we're the real deal, we can win this? Was there a turning point, or is it something that was organic and slowly grew as the season went on?
I'd say probably the turning point was when the Michigan game ended, because every game we had, those first 13 games, I mean, they were battles, and they really refined us. They really made us, we became a very tough football team. Now, we had a gigantic task in front of us with Miami, but we had 40 days to prepare for that. And but it was at that point, because really think about it, the game before Michigan, we had to go into overtime at Illinois. The Purdue game, Cincinnati, we could have lost. I mean, the Wisconsin game was a battle. So Penn State, she was a battle. So we didn't skate through the season by any means, and Michigan was good as heck. But I thought after getting through that regular season that we had a chance if we took the 40 days and had the right attitude, that we could be really good.
I know, Coach, your exit at Ohio State wasn't what you wanted, what fans, didn't want. You're still beloved by Buckeye Nation. I know you've been back to the university many times in the last few years, especially since leaving in 2010. Now that it's been more than a decade and you've held, different jobs since, when you look back at anything, was there anything that you learned from that experience that taught you any regrets or anything like that?
I think it's a reinforcement of what we were just talking about earlier. Sometimes you need to suffer. Sometimes you need to learn lessons. There are going to be times where it doesn't go the way you'd like it. And some ball games that you lose, maybe you did all right, but it didn't turn out, the way college football, changes at such warp speed at what it's all about, and it's toughest on the players. It's not, the coaches have to adjust to it, but we're adults and we have to handle the ups and downs. But one of the things I have said for the last 10 years that was a great life lesson for me was, you've got to make sure you don't get so busy going from one thing to the next that you can't handle the task at hand, that you can't stay on top of the fundamentals. And, I think about that as a president now. I mean, there are so many things that are going on and so many things they want me to be doing, but, I got to make sure that, my blocking and tackling is taken care of, and so, that was a good lesson. But I really think the more I've pondered life in general, watching teams, watching individuals, whether we like it or not, the toughest times produce the best future results. And so I have no, I don't know what the right word is. I'm not mad at anything that occurred. I'm not, woe is me. Every good thing that has happened, I'm not sure I deserved it. Every bad thing that has happened, I'm sure I learned from it. So I tell people all the time, when you get to a certain age, you can predict the future. And I'm now at that age. I hit age 70. And one thing I know about the future for you two guys is that there are going to be some up days and some down days.
Yeah.
That's just the way it's going to be. So if you think you're not going to have some, oh my gosh, moments, I can't believe that happened moments, you're going to. And what's going to be the key to your future will be how you handle those moments. And that's why the game of football is so good. That's why I listen to my players talk about what they're doing later in life and how they're the lessons they learn to handle the disappointing times, to handle the times when they didn't win, when they didn't deserve to win, or whatever. So that's all part of that pendulum of life.
Mm-hmm. It's a good life lesson. Life experiences can really mold you in the adversity that you learn and overcome from. Coach, you mentioned you're 70 years old. You're retiring from Youngstown State as a president. Do you ever see yourself coaching again?
No. I wouldn't even know what Ryan Day's playbook looks like. I mean, people teased me that I only had one play. He probably has 401. There's a time for everyone. I used to sit there when I was at Ohio State, kind of looking across the sideline and seeing Coach Paterno there and saying, he's there because he can. But I wonder how many people have missed having a chance to be the head coach at Penn State because he can stay. Mm-hmm. And I kind of told myself I never wanted to be in that situation. I think about when people ask me, are you going to go back into coaching? You know what? Someone else deserves that opportunity. I was blessed to have 25 years as a head coach. We played in 9 national championship games. I mean, hey, I can't, just because of my ego, ask for, I ought to be able to go do that again. And so there's some good young coaches coming up, and I love watching my former assistants. One of the things I hope to do in retirement is go see Coach Freeman play, go see Coach Fickle play, see Coach Fleck play, see Coach Tucker play, watch my nephew be the defensive coordinator of the Badgers. Those kinds of things are fun. Go see Ohio State play. When you're the president of a university, I was at, everyone said, hey, you going to the Buckeyes game? So no, we got a game, that day. And that's who signs my paycheck. But so I'm looking forward to that freedom to really enjoy someone else getting the chance to do the thing that blessed us, for so many years.
Did the NFL ever come knocking on the door? And back in the day, if this did happen, did you ever consider making the jump to the professional coaching ranks?
While I was at Ohio State, I think I had one conversation, very preliminary, nothing, but really was never interested in that, simply because I felt as if, and still do, as I'm an educator. Well, then as fate would have it, I ended up helping out Jim Caldwell at the Colts. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, this is good that I'm getting a chance to do this, because I'll see if I like this. And I enjoyed the heck out of, I was just there for one season, and Jim Caldwell might be the nicest human being ever on the face of the earth. But it also told me that this probably wouldn't be something that would be my first choice. Then after that, maybe once or twice, I talked to an owner when they had their list of like 20 people, that they were talking to. But it never really seemed to be something I was dying to do. Mm-hmm. And those jobs are too hard. If you're not dying to do it, you better not jump in that arena.
Coach, 2 more questions, and then we have a couple rapid fire, and then we'll let you go. Again, we appreciate your time this afternoon here. Talking about college football, how things have changed. You mentioned, you joke about how Ryan Day's playbook is probably so advanced and so much bigger than what I had at Ohio State and Youngstown State. The college game has changed quite a bit. First, what do you think of NIL and the transfer portal?
Well, the NIL, I guess when I think of that, I think of inevitable. I'm really disappointed as I look back over my 4 decades in college football that we didn't figure out, as the revenues were escalating and just exploding, we didn't figure out where might be a fair, inclusion of the student athletes in that. Us coaches were handsomely paid, the universities millions of dollars, and we never figured out, and we just kind of kept our thumb, nope, that's illegal, nope, so when I think of NIL, I think of inevitable, because when you're not being fair, inevitably it's going to explode. It's not going to be allowed to be forever. So now, unfortunately, because we didn't put good minds in the room and figure out how we should have done it appropriately. Now it's out of control. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be interesting to watch the evolution. I'm sure it's going to make it harder. I had the good fortune that everybody in my locker room had the same paycheck, zero, and there's something valuable about being broke. There's some lessons, that you learn. But having people in the locker room that are in all different, levels of pay and, that kind of thing is going to be difficult. And I think the other thing that's going to be interesting to watch is how long will the donors think this is the flavor of the day? And will it affect the other things you want to do? Will you be able to build the facilities that you've gone to the donors to do? Or the scholarships that they endowed? Or the other things on campus that they help out with, the library and whatever else. So it's going to be interesting. And I suppose the big schools, the Ohio States and the Texas and Southern Cal, maybe there's an endless flow of money that even when someone gets bored and says, you know what, I had an NIL deal and I was sponsoring with my company such and such, and he didn't even end up any good. I'm not going to do this anymore.
Right.
There might be someone else waiting. I don't know. But I'm not sure everyone will be in that situation. So it's going to be interesting to watch that. And then I think a little bit similar to the thing with the portal. I'm a real fan of when you make a decision, it's really a commitment. And if you change, okay, we have freedom to change, but there's going to be consequences to change. And I know the argument is, well, how come coaches don't have to, and I get that. Very valid argument. I think it's a little different in that coaches are in their professional career and college students are in their formative years. But anyway, so with the portal, I think what's going to be interesting is after we've done it 4 or 5 years or so, not that people didn't transfer in the past, they did. And I was kind of okay with that grad transfer thing. Like, hey, you came here, you got your degree. That's what we promised you. If you, want to go be able to get in the game, makes sense to me. And you've learned commitment because you stayed long enough to graduate. So what will the data look like of the transfers and how they fared? And because, we hear all the time about, the Caleb guy that went out to USC. Okay, that's great. And then there's 10 other ones you didn't hear about that went and didn't play it down.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And all of a sudden they left their friends. Their academic curriculum might have got interrupted a little bit. Sometimes everything doesn't transfer. And, so it's going to be interesting to see that data. I look at our Youngstown State men's basketball team. I mean, we're really pretty good. And we've got 3 or 4 transfer guys that weren't playing as much at like Dayton or, somewhere. And they're right now, last week we were number 1 in the country in points per possession, which I don't even know they had a stat for that. But we were ahead of Gonzaga and Purdue, I guess it was. And so the transfer portal has kind of been a good thing for the mid-range people in that the guys who were maybe 8th guy on the team at Dayton wants to be the guy getting 25 points a game. Hey, that worked out, so I don't know. We'll see. The only thing constant is change. And the only thing critical is data study. Mm-hmm. And so we're just going to have to see the data study of both the NIL thing and the portal thing and always keeping in mind things are going to constantly change.
Speaking of data, college football, like the NFL, like baseball, basketball, and all sports, professional and amateur, it's become an analytical business. Things are being measured. You can use the analytics to, spit out all sorts of data, and it's being utilized at pretty much every level. I mean, you look back, more teams are going for it on 4th down now. The game is certainly a lot different than in the past when you coached. Do you like the changes in the game?
I don't know that people thought that us dinosaurs didn't have data. Our data analyzing was, we analyzed everything. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's just become cute thing to talk about. And I think it's become something that people are, I don't want to say crutch, but almost a crutch. I'm a believer in the fact that there's a science to everything and there's an art to everything. And as soon as you get too much, you can't just go out on the field and say, I think I'll just call some plays because I got a feel. Well, no, you need data, you need film study, you need, to compare, can that guy block that guy? I know you think it might look good on the chalkboard, but your guy can't block him. So there's a science and an art to everything. That's why I think when I hear coaches described as winners win. Well, winners don't win because they're the best data guys. Winners win because they know how to use data, but they have an art about it. They just can do it. The painter can just paint. I can't paint. They have an art about it. And so I think some coaches have allowed the data to become their artistic director. And I'm not sure that's the best deal.
Mm-hmm. Good points. A
like
lot of things to sit on
Yeah.
and think about, Scott.
I like that, exactly, because I'm a data guy. But you're right; it's the implementation, and there's an art to it. I love how you summarize that.
I'll give you that one for free. I won't charge you for that one.
Thank you very much. All right, Coach. So we're going to get into our rapid fire questions, and these are relatively easy. One word answers, maybe a few half sentence. The first question is this: rapid fire question number one. You already talked about growing up as a Browns fan, growing up in Berea, being around some of the Browns players. Did you have a favorite athlete growing up that was right at your Mount Olympus of all the athletes that you grew up idolizing?
Wow. Let me think here. Probably Vic Power.
Oh, yeah. From the Indians. Sure.
Indians. Yeah. I love Vic. I even swung my bat like him, he was, I had a lot of them. I was one of those kids that delivered the plain dealer, and all I did was, I could tell you everyone's batting average. And so I probably didn't have one, but when you asked the question, Vic kind of popped in my mind.
I know this next question, you will not have one answer to this, but if you could think off the top of your head, some of your favorite players you've coached at Ohio State.
Well, I'm not going to do that one because whoever I leave out, because I know you're worldwide in this audience. And so I know every one of my guys is probably listening. And I'll get a text saying, I can't believe you mentioned 6 guys. You didn't even mention me. So I'm gonna defer that one.
All right,
I had a lot of great kids.
Yeah, fair enough. And I kind of had a feeling you would say that, but I just had to squeeze that in there for you.
Do you have a favorite place to eat in Columbus or when you were coaching down at OSU?
Yeah, Ellen and I liked the refectory.
Okay.
We're on the north side, right off of Bethel.
Okay.
That was kind of if we wanted to get away and, not have to, take pictures and sign autographs and whatever. The refectory was kind of our favorite.
This is a kind of a fun fan question that I've heard asked before on radio shows and everything. And I've always wanted to ask you, and I can't believe I have a forum now to ask you this. Coach, how many sweater vests do you currently own?
Oh, man, hundreds. Because
really?
Every place I go, I don't care if it's Huntington Bank, if I speak to their leadership team, I get a Huntington Bank sweater vest. If it's Medina Highland basketball team, I stop by because one of my neighbors, plays with, I get they give me I just spoke to Eastern Michigan's team the night before they played Kent this year because Chris Creighton's a dear friend of mine and Taver Johnson's on their staff and Brandon Blaney and Bed Needham, all guys that were at Ohio State with us. And so I went to speak and they gave me an Eastern Michigan sweater vest. So I've got hundreds.
After football, what's your favorite sport?
The sport that popped into my mind was volleyball.
Really?
I just loved playing it. Intramural at Baldwin Wallace, I loved intramural volleyball. My youngest daughter, she was junior Olympic volleyball and then high school. And there's just something about volleyball that I liked. Now, I played basketball and baseball and football, but the one that popped was volleyball.
Besides the Horseshoe, what were your favorite stadiums you coached in?
You know, I liked Penn State because it was really difficult. I liked Camp Randall because that was so difficult. It was, you know, kind of fun to be in. We kind of liked the old Arizona State one at Tempe. You know, that was nice and close. And you got into some of those other big ones like Glendale or like down at the Superdome, and you felt like the fans weren't even anywhere near you. It was weird. But those old college stadiums, Sun Devil Stadium, I thought was a pretty special place to coach.
Isn't that where you won the national title in that stadium?
Yeah, we played them, Kansas State, and Notre Dame there in Sun Devil Stadium, and those were really neat environments.
Do you have a hobby that's not sports related?
Yeah, I like to read.
Any
nonfiction, fiction?
Okay.
I'm sorry, John.
Yep.
You know, I like both fiction and nonfiction, but the fiction I like are the ones that teach lessons. So I guess it's pseudo fiction.
All right, we have 3 more, and then we'll let you go. Did you have any pregame superstitions or meals you had to eat as a player in your playing early days or as a coach?
At Baldwin Wallace, I don't even think we could afford to have a meal. So I don't think we had a pregame meal. At Youngstown State, we always had a hamburger, and apple pie, and the same at Ohio State. Although we had more food at Ohio State than we could stand, but always had to have apple pie. That was, in fact, I think we even flew Ohio apple pie out to our bowl games. I mean, that was important.
Very cool.
And we had those cinnamon buns that the golf course made, the Ohio State golf course. They had these cinnamon rolls that we would fly those out to our bowl games as well.
Wow. Did not know that. Very neat.
Favorite TV show?
Favorite TV show, man.
Yeah, one that maybe you're watching now if you have time, or you watched in the last several years.
Or maybe one you had back in the day.
Zorro.
Wow. You know, John, it's funny because I think our father, our dad, talks about watching that too.
Yeah.
Zorro was big. Yeah. In the last 50 years, I can't remember watching a TV show, but Zorro when I was a kid.
All right. Last question. And I just got a text from someone as we're recording this that knows you, and I'm going to follow up with that in a second. But do the Buckeyes win a national title, let's say, the next 3 years?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
You didn't hesitate one bit there, Coach.
Yeah. Buckeyes got some folks. I mean, we were an inch from this year. I mean, come on. And the lessons learned this year with the talent. There was some talk 2 or 3 days ago. CJ's going to stay. CJ's going to stay. I thought, if CJ stays, you know, but then he didn't end up staying. But I thought those agents would talk him out of that. But you know, they've done a great job of, you know, the beauty of that historical study of Ohio State is, you know, it's been a trajectory that each era has kind of stacked on top of the next one. And, you know, I just think we've really got good talent. We got great facilities, got great, you know, there's great excitement about Ohio State football. We can recruit against anybody, anywhere, you know, and that's been an evolution.
And I just got a text from someone that knows you, a former colleague of Scott's at Fox 8, my old mentor, John Tellage, former Fox 8 WJW.
JT.
Yeah, I'm going to read you a text that he sent me verbatim. He says, hey, Sabes, please remind Jim that he's not the big JT. I'm the big JT.
There's no question. He was JT long before I was JT.
Oh,
I told him we'd sneak that in there. But
that's great. Hey, Coach, I got one other question, because usually when we interview people, we can see their backdrop, whether it's a like for you, you have your books behind you. On your top shelf, you have a baseball up there. Is that autographed by anyone? The one right there.
Wait a minute.
All right, yeah. Yeah, that one right there.
Let me see. Yeah, that's Bobby Richardson.
Oh, okay.
You know who Bobby Richardson is? We'll see if you're really sports guys.
Oh boy, the name sounds really familiar.
Oh my gosh.
Oh,
Uh-oh, Scott, he put you on the spot.
I know he put me on the spot.
You guys are not legit. You're not legit. Bobby Richardson, 10 times in the World Series. He was a World Series MVP.
Yankees, right?
Yeah. Well, you got your Google out.
I did. I Googled it really quickly.
Whenever your eyes go down,
Yeah. When you're like this.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Bobby, he's truly one of my heroes. He played from 55 to 66 for the Yankees, and might have been like the 10 World Series, and he was the MVP. And but I heard him speak, and I'll end with this. I heard him speak when I was like in 10th grade. I think it was 10th grade. And we were at a Fellowship of Christian Athletes camp. And he said, and this is after he retired in 66. And so this was like 67 or 68. So he was fresh. I mean, be like, your favorite second baseman retiring and you see him the next year. And I'll never forget, he said, if the game of life ended tonight, would you be a winner? And it's like, ooh. Because we were all there. It was a sports camp. We know what winning and losing is. Like, you can't have it back. And he said, the game of life. And so I kind of put my head down. You know how you do when you're in class and you don't want to call on you? I thought, well, fortunately, he interrupted all of our embarrassment or whatever we were all thinking and said, well, if you'd like to be able to answer yes, simply ask God into your life and make sure he directs your life. And if you'll do that, you win in the game of life. And that's why this ball is very important to me. He didn't sign it that night. I think I bought it at one of those auctions or something. I said, oh my gosh, Bobby Richardson. So.
Wow. That is very deep, and man, it makes you really, really question and think about yourself and evaluate and really just improve and learn.
That's right.
Well, Coach, we're going to end on that positive note. We want to thank you so much for joining us here for almost an hour.
I know I got a 2:00 call. You guys put me right up against it.
That's fantastic, Coach. It's been a pleasure and an honor speaking with you and hearing good stories and motivation and just hearing about your life and where you're going. Looking forward to hearing from you soon.
All righty. Well, enjoy and go Bucks, go Penguins. Go Guardians, Browns, Cavs. Oh, you know what my claim to fame is? You do know that. You shouldn't leave the podcast without knowing that.
What's that?
I was the first ball boy in the history of the Cleveland Cavaliers.
No way.
You didn't know that one.
At the old Cleveland Arena?
Cleveland Arena. Yep. But I was even before that. I was at the expansion training camp when they came and started their franchise. I ran the 24-second clock in practice. I washed their laundry. I took the balls out. I had the wristbands. I mean, that was back in the day.
I would love to hear stories about that one of these days.
Man.
That is incredible.
So
I love that.
I'm a Cavs guy before anyone was a Cavs.
Yeah. Where was that place, by the way, before the arena?
Well, the training camp was at Baldwin Wallace. And the way it ended up was Bill Fitch and Nick Maletti were the owner and the coach came and they had no one else. So my dad's trainer became their trainer, and he ended up being an NBA trainer for the next 35 years. They needed someone to do the laundry and put the balls out and run the 24-second clock. So he sent me over and said, "You're doing this."
That's outstanding.
I was voluntold.
Voluntold.
That is fantastic.
Yep.
Jim, thank you so much for your time. We'll get you to that call. We'll check back with you sometime soon down the road. Thanks so much, and go Bucks.
Yepper. See ya.
Bye-bye. Bye. So, John, we talked to Coach Tressel, President Tressel, for, 57 minutes, and we're ready to conclude. And then he throws the zinger in there that he's the first Cavs ball boy. Who knew?
Who knew? And you know what? I don't think that's been written anywhere. And if it is, I've missed it along the years here. That is just an outstanding random fact that deserves another follow-up conversation. And I had no idea, Scott, he was a big Cavs fan either.
No, I didn't either. I mean, but you know what? I mean, if he's 70, so he was born in, say, I think 52, is that right? Or 50, I forget. So the point is, he was in his early 20s, late teens, early 20s, when the Cavs are just coming into existence. So think about that. He was there at the right place at the right time.
So he's born in 52. Cavs started what, in 70?
70. Yeah. So he was 18. Yeah. I mean, can you imagine that?
Yeah, that's
fantastic.
Wow.
So
yeah,
love the conversation with him. I think the big take home message with everything is that you learn from your mistakes and you celebrate your victories. But I like what he had to say is that, in order to get, and I forget his exact words, but in order to get good, and in order to win, you're going to have to suffer a little bit, and that's a hard pill for people to swallow.
Right. And I try to write down his exact quote, and I may have messed it up. We can go back and listen to it. But I think he says, with suffering comes great results or success. And then he went on to say, the toughest time features the best results, meaning you got to go through a lot of stuff in order to, to come out. And that's why I think the best thing to happen sometimes in life is to fail. And, you learn from it, and he has definitely done that over his career. And man, this is his stories about his father, stories about Ohio State and Youngstown State, and then just football in general, and a big Cleveland guy too. So very, very good times, and very happy to talk to him about it. And I love that he spent a lot of time, Scott, talking about that Michigan rivalry and how he is not worried a bit, and he likes what Ryan Day is doing.
Yep, no question. And something interesting here, because he's exactly right when it comes to data and analytics. He's right. I know I'm a data guy, I know I'm a math guy, but they've been using this stuff for years and years. And it's the implementation. It's learning how to take all that information and the art of using that to your advantage. And some people can do it, some people can't.
And to be fair, a lot of times we don't know exactly what they're using and doing. I know a lot of people love to tack on the Browns for their analytitive or the Guardians or whatever. But his point and what he said, it was so dead on. And we couldn't have asked any more time with him. He went above and beyond our timetable, and we cannot thank President and soon to be former President of Youngstown State University and former Ohio State head coach Jim Tressel. Thank him so much. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Please give us a rating. It helps out the pod quite a bit. If you haven't already, follow us on Twitter at Sabol Brothers. You can follow yours truly at John_Sabol.
And you can follow me at Scott Sabol FOX8. If you have a suggestion and maybe you want us to do some research, and you have someone that's really interesting coming from Northern Ohio, and you want us to maybe do a podcast and interview someone, send us a note. We'd love to hear from you. Send us a note on Twitter. You can find us on Facebook. Hey, we're open to any and all suggestions when it comes to Northern Ohio and Ohio sports.
Yeah, it's a new year, and I'm glad we started off the new year with a tremendous guest as Jim Tressel. We always get some comments from people of suggestions, and we like those. So keep them coming. Hear you next time right here on the Press Play Podcast Network. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.